Hey guys, thanks for joining us today on Unfathered Fathers. We got my buddy David Faulk. We've known each other probably around 12 years now, something like that. And was going to be him and his wife, but his wife ain't feeling good. So we just kind of flipped the script and kind of talk about his growing up. But David, thanks for coming. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.
I think this podcast is going to be pretty good because me and you've been open. We actually, which is crazy, you come from somebody that's never been faithful in his life and then give his life to God and get married, and then somebody that's been divorced and trying to figure it out all over again. And God called us both to teach a marriage class.
Yes, sir.
we teach a marriage class together, and but we both kind of in the same of just being open books, and kind of revealing our shame, the screw ups, being okay with admitting that sometimes we were idiots, and God had to really take us around the long way to teach us how to be men, how to be fathers and husbands, and so. But anyway, David, so we talk a little bit. So kind of tell me where you grew up and kind of what that atmosphere looked like.
Yes, sir. So I was born and raised in St. Bernard Parish, which is a suburb right off of Orleans. So it's easy to say that I was born in Orleans Parish, but I was born right off a suburb of it, and but grew up in the heart of Orleans Parish, and I truthfully enjoyed that lifestyle. Missed the culture down there, and I know that you and I will talk a little bit about the culture. And glad to be up here in Arkansas. Glad that I was able to raise my 4 kids up here in Arkansas. But coming from the deep South and being around New Orleans atmosphere, it was definitely different. But really enjoyed it. Enjoyed being down there and enjoyed the atmosphere we had. It's big city atmosphere, so everything was a party, and you always had something to do. But otherwise it's just not much different than any other city, just a lot more population.
I would argue that it is. We were talking, I actually was doing a job several years ago. It was actually when Katrina hit. I was actually in New Orleans. I was staying at the Hyatt right next to the Superdome.
Yes, sir.
And I was working in Slidell.
Okay.
And so we were in Slidell, and we got something come over the radio, and they said, if you, whatever bridge you had to cross, they said, if you're there, you got to evacuate immediately. And so we didn't even get to finish the job, and we packed up, left, got back to the hotel. But that night, we went down on the main strip there, and I was walking around, and I was just thinking, because there's sex bars.
Yes, sir.
Where you sit around, watch people have sex in front of you.
That's correct.
Strip clubs, bars, and they were having hurricane party.
Yep.
The whole strip was celebrating that, drinking to the hurricane stuff. They really didn't realize what was coming.
Yes, sir.
But I was just talking to God, and I was like, man, how do you expect a young man to grow up in this atmosphere and sex and porn and all that stuff not be a problem? It's all over the place there, right?
Yes, sir.
So when you're a kid, tell me how that looked. How was that atmosphere for you?
So I guess the one word that I can use is normal. Like, that's what it felt like. And so I've said this before about, in fact, I want to think I've used it in our marriage class before, that however someone is raised becomes their normal. And so it's hard to deprogram their normal, because you're basically telling someone the way they grew up, or what their parents taught them, or what culture has taught them is incomplete or wrong to what they are. And so that's why, like, when you and I talk, or when we teach our marriage class, we really try to reference the Bible as much as we can. That way it's not us telling someone they're wrong. We're really trying to go, y'all, just open up the Word and understand that what God's telling you is that what you've seen, what you experienced, what you've been taught is wrong. And that way it doesn't become something personal. It's just a God thing. But it was definitely something that was out there. and you couldn't hide from it, you couldn't run from it. It was everywhere you looked, everywhere you seen, and I think even conversations about having sex. And so for the audience to know this, when me and Dylan teaches our marriage class,
Yeah.
if anything has to be taught in the sexual nature,
Yeah.
Dylan gets embarrassed.
Yeah,
So
like,
he'll
you got that one.
normally say, "Hey brother, next week we're going to talk about sex and marriage, so it's on you." And
Yeah,
so
because growing up in Arkansas, like, that wasn't, you wasn't bringing that up around grandma and grandpa, around the people, it just, like you were saying, it was just part of our language. We talked about that. And you even said that you took a field trip as a grade schooler,
yes, sir,
down the main strip, and you got, when I walked down there, you got those big glass windows, and you got girls back in there in lingerie or hardly anything on. And so you're a little kid taking a field trip and getting to see all that.
Yes, sir. So, it's funny because when you brought it up, you talked about porn.
Yeah.
And obviously today's world where you just pull it up on your phone and you have it at your disposal, it becomes a lot easier for society to dive into the sexual culture. For us, but you think back into the 90s, you didn't have phones in your pockets, 80s and 90s. And so for us, that's probably why I'm so open and you're so embarrassed by it, because for you to even see it, I would assume it's whether or not someone had a Playboy inside of a house, because otherwise you're not
seeing them. You had to steal them, or
Yes.
you steal them from somebody's dad that had them. You couldn't just go. You had to really work to try to get it.
Yes, sir. And so for us, it was just a drive. And in many things, I think it was acceptable, but it was readily available. I don't think anyone, because the more we talk, the more it's going to sound like, how would your parents bring you to that? And I'm going to tell you a story about my grandpa, who was a wonderful, wonderful man. But when you can start to consider kind of your surroundings, it just, once something's open and people talking about it, it just kind of becomes the norm. And so once it becomes the norm, well, then it's more acceptable. If that makes sense, it kind of just stages on itself. And so, but yeah, we would take field trips. And like I told you, I don't think it was by no means elementary school, but I remember it kind of middle school, maybe even junior high, but I really think middle school is when we started taking field trips down to the French Quarters. And so you'd walk around the French Quarters, and it wasn't necessarily Bourbon Street, so you wasn't necessarily looking in the strip clubs. But if you've ever been in New Orleans, like this, the sex is everywhere. Nudity is everywhere. Cladly dressed women and men, all in the same, is everywhere. Voodoo is everywhere. Like I remember on field trips going to voodoo shops, and like part of the reason you went to the French Quarters is to see the cultural part of voodoo in that area, and Marie Laveau and cemeteries, and that's a big part of New Orleans. And so from grade school on up, you were taught some of the cultural stuff about New Orleans, and that was one of them. To just kind of dip back into sex, I remember this story, and once again, my grandfather was a great guy, but I just want to kind of throw this down now on the idea of how open it was. And I was probably 14 or something, like 13, 14 years old. But I remember him telling me a story about a prostitution house down in New Orleans. And just, his comment about how, I got to watch how we word stuff. And I don't want to curse anyway, don't curse. But how women, the price of women have changed, but the product hasn't, you know what I'm saying? And you think about, once again, you may think differently right now, but my granddad was a great guy, a good person in my life, a good influence, but that was just, once again, just a quick example of how kind of open it was. Like you drive around town and they would point at stuff, and they would also point at good stuff, right? Fats Domino's had a house in New Orleans, and you'd pass it up and hey, man, that's where Fats lives, and different stuff like that. And so there was just cultural things that was always brought up, and you just kind of knew it, and sex was one of those things. And so by the time you're 13, 14, 15, and puberty's really hitting, and so now your mind's racing, and sex means something to you as a young man. Well, I know exactly where to go to find it, so all I need is someone with a driver's license, and we gonna hit Bourbon Street. And by this time, And I won't spend too much time, unless you ask me, on my mom and dad's divorce, but my mom and dad was divorced, and so rules had kind of slimmed down a little bit. The rules in my house when my mom and dad was married was really, really tough. My mom made the rules, and my dad he'd disappear for a while and come back home, not for long periods, but if he came back home and mom said you got in trouble, like, you were getting waylaid. Like, so we were scared of my dad. And but it was enough to kind of keep us in order. But once mom and dad got divorced, like, really, my mom kind of laid back. My dad didn't have any rules. And so, 13, 14 years old, especially by the time he was 14, 15, like, we spent our weekends on Bourbon Street. And so when you're thinking about going up and down Bourbon Street, you're 100% right. There was a place called The Orgy. And the concept behind that place was watching people have an orgy. Like, you would literally walk through the place, and it was like a glass screen, but you was watching people have sex. And so live sex acts. And so even if you just walk down the street, the doors would be open. And so if nothing else, you could take a peek, and you could see the strippers would be on the board tops and dancing. So you may not be able to go in and actually drop a dollar a touch, but at 14, 15 years old, you could readily see nudity anytime you wanted. And I grew up in Catholicism, and so we were born and raised Catholic, and got saved at 24. And so trying to pursue purity after that salvation at 24, I think I had the switch kind of flipped in my mind. Like, I wanted it, but it was difficult just because of, I had so many skeletons in the closet and so many demons, and like, it was just, it was so much implanted inside of my spirit, inside of my mind, that being able to take those being able to take those thoughts captive and be able to erase that stuff it's almost impossible. Without God, it is impossible, because there's so much in there.
I'm just thinking, I love cologne. Mm-hmm. Like, and which I've lost my smell. I got COVID like a year ago. I haven't been able to smell for like a year, and it's a bummer because I love cologne. But used to, I would go into Dillard's and I would spend like an hour. I would smell every single cologne on there, because I always wanted to buy something that I didn't have. But after so long smelling all these colognes, eventually you couldn't decipher. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you had too much of these different things that you couldn't tell them apart. And you would have to go, they have coffee beans or something, and you would smell them coffee beans and try to reset the smell. Yep. And I think that sex before marriage, porn, and all that stuff that when you're exposed to it, and you just let yourself dive into it, it's like something that was supposed to smell sweet, a sweet anointed aroma before God, because God created sex. There's nothing wrong with sex. God created it, but it's supposed to be holy and between one man and one woman. And then we go around and we grab all these different cologne, different women, and before we know it, it's like it's not necessarily that, oh man, I love this smell. It's like, I've already had that smell. I want this next one. Yep. And then before you know it, you don't realize it, and you get married and you're like, I've ruined my smell. Yep. Like, I don't even know how to to understand how this holy intimacy, because I've always been smelling cologne. Yeah. You know what I mean? I've been sleeping around, and it's really sad. I don't know. I don't know my first marriage. Definitely not pre-salvation. Post-salvation, me and my ex-wife, we really did have it, not necessarily figured out, but we flipped a switch and went, like, life's got to change. Like, what we're doing is not right. And so I think that there was definitely some, like, we were really trying to accomplish holiness, but 100%. Like pre that, when me and Lana met, we were in high school. She got pregnant before we got married. So obviously we were having sex before marriage, and so I don't even think we thought of it as a holy act. It wasn't even something that we comprehended. And you had asked me something before we turned the cameras on, but it was just about if I was desensitized from it, seeing it so much.
And so that's a perfect way of answering that question, because I didn't even think of it as the holy union or something between one man, one woman. And when I got married, I wanted it to be forever. Like I was perfectly fine with the idea of being with that woman forever. But with that said, like, I never thought about that in the sexual side. From the moment I was 13, 14 years old, it was obtain sex. You know what I'm saying? And so it wasn't anything that like, I never thought about waiting for marriage. Like, that wasn't even it wasn't something I was trying to comprehend. Wasn't even debating it.
Yeah, I remember when me and Jennifer were engaged, we were going to Live in Faith, and there was a marriage class that was that we went to, and they talked about that marriage is a blood covenant, and it begins the first time you have sex. That's when the blood covenant begins, because a woman, when she's a virgin, has that thin skin, and when you have sex for the first time, that skin breaks and they bleed, and then your semen mixes with that blood, and that's when the blood covenant starts. They were just talking about how that God designed it to be holy, to be a covenant where you become one flesh.
Yes, sir. And
it's an intimacy that you're only supposed to share with that one person. And I remember thinking, like, man, I ruined that. Like you and two, it was a struggle, because when we got married, I was jealous about anybody that she had been with. I struggled with thinking about the people that I've been. You compare, and it's like you've got this puzzle that God wanted to just, or this picture that God wanted when you got married and you honored Him, that He just wanted to present as a whole piece. But when we come into it all broken and we've given ourselves away, it's like a puzzle that's just ripped apart.
Yep.
And you get married and you're trying to do the right thing and understand the true intimacy and be faithful and all that stuff. And it's like we spent several years having to put pieces back together of all the stuff I'd gone through life, just tearing apart, breaking, just not understanding the holiness and just how big of a problem I was causing for myself to try to do it right.
Yeah. You talked about comparing yourself, and I think that's one of the big issues when you think about sex before marriage, or even just jumping relationship to relationship, depending on your degree of intimacy. But the more things, it's Baskin Robbins and 31 flavors, right? If you just had the one flavor in front of you, it may be the best flavor ever, maybe the one that you even picked. But the truth is, it's almost like there's this subconscious part of your mind where you're always trying to think back, and you're always trying to compare, and you're always trying to make notes. And I heard a guy preach this one day, but he basically just took a piece of paper and he said, every time you have sex, and he just tearing the piece of the paper off, right? Well, the piece of paper was actually a demonstration of a person's heart. And so, like, I'd give a piece to you and give a piece to you, and every time you go out here and have this intimate act with someone, and so then by the time you find a person that you truly have fallen in love with, and I'm going to make you my wife, well, then my heart that was this big now is just a little piece. And so it's exactly what you're saying. Now we're trying to gravitate back and pull those pieces together. That way I can give you a whole heart. But the truth of it is I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but I've wasted pieces of it, right? I've given intimacy out, and purity has been released, and the innocence of love has been given away, and those things, man, those are puzzle pieces that are hard to get back and hard to put back. That it takes many, many years of work on that one, diligent work, and I truly think it takes I don't know if you could do it without a relationship with God, Dylan.
No,
I don't know if it's possible.
I couldn't. There's absolutely no way. I mean, I tried to give up on our marriage, and a lot of it had to do with just intimacy. It got to a point to where I just wasn't even attracted to Jennifer, and and it's so crazy. I mean, that's everything that's holy and right, Satan flips it.
Yes, sir.
I mean, absolutely everything. He flips it to where it's evil, destructive, where it kills, steal, and destroy. And yeah, I mean, if it would not been for God, like, kept pulling me and kept making me work on the marriage, I mean, I wanted out. I felt like I got tricked into the covenant marriage thing. Because I signed the covenant marriage and God knew what he was doing. But, I was like, I had made my mind, I'm leaving. And then I realized what I had signed with that covenant marriage. And I was like, crud, I got to do like 4 years of counseling. Yeah. And I was like, or two or for however long it is. I was like, I don't want to do that. And I really didn't have, the counselor's going to be like, well, why? And I'm like, well, I'm just not attracted to her anymore, And it was even crazy, the fact, because my wife, I mean, my wife is way prettier than I should be married to. I mean, it's not, it's just, that's what sin does.
Yes.
Sin puts a blindfold over you and you give up on what things that are the best for you.
Yep.
I mean, I could not imagine. And that's the sad thing. A lot of times people give up on life and they don't ever give God the full chance to put all those pieces back together like you're talking about. And, yeah, it was by the grace of God. I think that every time I thought, that's it, I'm completely giving up, I'm running away, I would have to remind myself where I come out of. And it's like the realization, if you run away, remember what you're going back to. Like, what hope do you truly have? And, yeah, man, I mean, you have to stick around to see the results, the godly results. I mean, God, that's what people don't understand, or they don't give God a chance, because we have to put in the work first. The Bible says to draw nigh to God, and then he'll draw nigh to us. So in everything, with our marriage, we have to put in the work and honor God and seek God, and then God starts working. It's not like we're like, I don't care about this, I'm not putting in work, and then God just magically starts working. Like, we have to be willing to allow God to change us.
Yes, sir.
So tell me about, growing up. I know a little bit about your dad, but what and you end up moving in with your dad, is that right? Or were you only your dad's son and with your mom's son when your mom and dad split
post
up?
divorce, I moved in with my dad after a while. It was years later. But yes, sir.
Okay. And your dad, you said he didn't really have rules for you, and your dad was did he just kind of check out on the family and just, I mean, what do you think drove your dad from just them splitting up and not wanting to make it work out?
So my mom and dad got divorced when I was probably 10 or 11, somewhere in that window. I was still a preteen. Mm-hmm. I know that much, maybe 9, but really so we're going to talk. We'll talk a lot about some of the deficiencies of my dad, but I'm just going to be honest. We'll just lay it on the table and say drugs and alcohol, 100% drugs and alcohol. Now, I have an older brother and a younger sister. If you talk to my older brother or younger sister, they don't call him dad. They call him by his name, Russell. And so even as teenagers, I remember them calling him Russell. I always called him dad. And I don't know why. I'll give you some insight of why I think that's the case. I always found something to respect about him, to be honest. But I really think my dad was a great guy. He just had an addiction. His addiction was greater than his love for his family, and his addiction was greater than his pursuit of everything that I'm going to tell you that was good about him. But if you talk to me long enough, you'll start hearing some philosophical tones. Like I love kind of that kind of pursuit of knowledge and the idea of finding a new way to think of something. That comes from my dad. My dad growing up would always have these little tidbits of information that he would drop and he would say. The problem with my dad is that he was only around for a little while, and then he would go screw off, and he'd get a paycheck, and then he would go run off and drugs and women, and then he'd come back broke, and we grew up watching my mom cry and hurt and try to hold that marriage together while my dad ran around on having sex with everything that he could find and blowing all his money on cocaine and alcohol. And so then he'd come home when he was broke, and so my brother and sister has every right to call him by his name and not call him dad. And I just had a love for him and I think it was just a a boy's love to really desire a father. And so I was always the closest to him in the idea that I think I wanted a relationship with him. And so when him and my mom got divorced at whatever it was, 10 or 11 years old, he immediately went into rehab. So downtown New Orleans, they called it the Bridge House because it was a AA thing right underneath the Claiborne Bridge, and so that's why they coined it the Bridge House. But he did rehab there, and I think he lived there. Their way of doing, I don't know if it was 1, 2, or 3 phases, but once you rehab, then you could live there for a year. And then after doing your time there, you had to work. And then after that, they actually put you in a supplemental home where they pay for 50%, you pay for 50%, and they basically care for you for like about a 3-year period. And so post-divorce, like, he really did clean up his life, stopped drinking, tried to get things right, stayed inside of his AA group, and really tried to do good. And that lasted for probably about the 3 years of the 1, 2, 3 cycle. And then once he was back on his own, he actually got remarried to a woman named Susan. And I really think that he had a desire to, hey, I messed up the first one, I'm going to get the second one right. And I don't know the ins and outs of why it didn't last, but it didn't last. And when it didn't last, he just went on a bender, and then it was all done again. And so by this time, I'm probably 13, 14 years old. And, dad's back dad again. Like, dad's being Russell again. Like, he's going to do him. Yeah. And so by this time, he had moved back to St. Bernard Parish, and he was living in his little apartment complex. And as a 14, 15-year-old kid, I'm really challenging my mom, and my mom's just getting tired of me, just to be honest, tired of my rebellion. And I wasn't doing anything bad, but I was the kid that would poke a little bit, and just always wanted to be out, never wanted to be home, be around the friends. If she told me to be home at 1, I wanted to be home at 2 a.m. It was that side. It wasn't like my mom had hardcore rules. Like, I could kind of come and go as I please. I could stay at people's houses. Like, she was really relaxed when you really consider it. But even in her relaxed state, like, I was still going to push. And so one day I pushed too far, and she said, you can go live with your dad if you don't like it here. And I went, all right, see you later, And so by 15 years old, I'm living with my dad, and my dad had 0 rules, like none. We do what we want, when we want. That dude wake me up on a Monday morning and go, you want to go to school? Nah, Dad. All right, man. And he'd shut the door, and that would be it. And if he went on a bend and needed to call in for work, we didn't even have a working phone at home. I'd walk down to the gas station, put money in a payphone, and then call his work and go, hey, man, this is David, Russell's son. He's sick today, And so, we definitely became, like, it was kinship. It was friendship. Yeah. It definitely wasn't father and son by no means. It was kinship. But he let me party. He'd let me have girls around. We had 2 friends move in. They rebelled against their parents. They'd move in. And so, it's my dad and me and 2 friends living in this little 2-bedroom apartment in a place called Village Square. It was the poverty area of St. Bernard Parish. And we just came and went as we wanted. And my dad was busy doing what he wanted. And so when you're busy as a father doing what you want, then you really don't have a whole lot of time to pay attention to what your kids are doing. And that lasted for probably about 2 years. Like, we ran recluse, and it got to a spot where things were getting so out of hand that I ended up going back to my mom and just asking her, like, I think I want to leave, Dad. Like, it was getting to the point where it was pretty wild. I never done drugs in my life, never smoked a cigarette in my life. So we were just drinking and partying, but it was getting to the spot where it was so wild that even in my normal mind, I was like, this is getting crazy. And so when I went back to my mom, my dad tried to commit suicide, and we ended up having to put him in a mental institution and just kind of get him calmed down, get him on medication again. He was Vietnam vet, so his mind was already just a little bit off, and so a lifetime of self-medication, and until doctors put him on prescribed medication, but he never could stop the alcohol and drugs. I mean, he he drank and smoked and did drugs, and at least to my knowledge, to the day he died. And I was at his bedside when he passed away. And you know, as a teenager, Dylan, it was fun as can be. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, when you think about 15, 16, 17 years old and absolutely no rules, come and go as you please. But I mean, that's part of the reason as we progress forward into a marriage, trying to figure out how to be a dad. That's why I failed so much as a dad, as a husband, because from early on, I never really seen it. You know what I mean? My dad was in and out. I don't know why this sticks out. I remember a few things about my childhood, but there was a public swimming pool in St. Bernard Parish. And I remember it was me, my dad, and my Uncle Clyde. Uncle Clyde, he died of cancer when in his 30s, and so he's passed away as well. Another one, just like my dad, drank and did drugs his whole life. Just another wild man. And but we were walking out the swimming pool, and there was a woman. I don't remember what she looked like, nothing like that. Like, it's not that vivid, but she had a tattoo on her breast. And I remember my dad and Clyde talking the woman into showing them the tattoo on her breast, so she has to drop her, you know, her bikini so they can see her breast. And that's one of the first memories I remember as a little kid of time with my dad. And so my dad's always kind of been in those cycles. But like, you take the drugs, you take the alcohol, it's going to be rough to say it. He's a good man, but, you know what I mean? But if you take the alcohol and the drugs, you take the addiction away, I don't know, he might have still been a kind of a man-hole. He might have still ran around with my mom. And for that, you know, you can't even credit that to his addiction. But in the same sense, like, when you sat down with him, when he was clean, he worked for a hospital. He was the employee of the month multiple times. He was the employee of the year. He was deep down inside, he really was a good guy. He was an intelligent guy. He was very, very smart. I think he was driven to work. He just couldn't get out of his own way. And because he had those addictions on him, it not only did it ruin his life, but eventually put him in his grave.
Yeah, addiction's very similar. My dad was a great guy. He's funny. He was kind of the life of the party. Mm-hmm. You know, everybody liked him, and real charismatic, and just loved to laugh and have a good time. But yeah, addiction would rob that.
Yep.
You know, when he would isolate himself, and I'm sure the shame would kind of overwhelm him, and it would rob him of the gifts and the talents that God had placed in him. That, you know, the addiction mm-hmm. would take all that away. And I don't know about you, and it took a while, man. It wasn't like you don't step off into it being great. I mean, it is work to even just to be somewhat good. And even when you feel like you're really killing it, there's really not much to brag about. You know what I mean? Because you're just one thought or one decision or one action away of throwing that all out the window.
Yes, sir.
You know, and but that's one reason why I'm such a advocate against, alcohol, smoking weed, even painkillers and stuff, because you take too many I've done it. Take too many pain pills and you get kind of zombied out, and you just you're there, but you're not. And, it's so hard already to be a good man.
Yes, sir.
That it's so easy, and it's so easy to lose that. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to like with alcohol, for me, there's just no way. There's no way I can maintain being faithful, being there for my kids, being consistent, not doing something that I would be ashamed of or that would hurt somebody with alcohol in my life. I mean, it's just not. And, and it's, we try to justify all kinds of things, right? We always talk about a motorcycle, and I've wanted one I used to have one. Me and Jennifer got married when we started having all these kids. She's like, you're going to get out there and get killed and leave me with all these kids. She didn't want me out having a motorcycle. So I was like, okay, well, I'll sell it. And it is, she didn't want to ride with me because, the kid, especially when the kids were young. And so it became a selfish hobby. When I go riding, I was just me,
Sure.
and I, now I thank God that He stuck it out, and God gave me the realization that, the Bible talks about we suffer many pains for the sake of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And there's things, and not necessarily pains, but things that we would maybe like to do selfishly, but we have to be willing to lay them aside so that we can truly become the man that God's called us to be, to become selfless. I mean, to truly become selfless, there's a lot of things you have to give up.
Yes, sir.
There's a lot of things in life that you have to go, you know what? It might be something I want to do, but it's not something that I need to do or that I can do. Being the man that I need to be and the father I need to be. And, like you said, you said, I didn't even know, when you're talking about when you got married in Atlanta, like, man, I didn't even know what that looked like. I didn't either. But for me, I even though I didn't know what it looked like, I did have a willingness somewhere deep down in me of like wanting to be a good man.
Yeah.
Like, especially being a father, I was like, man, so the last thing the world needs is for me. And I almost did that. When Jennifer got pregnant, I was like, I'm leaving. I don't know how to be a father. I don't even know if I want that responsibility. And, I was like, man, I'll just get out of here and she'll be all right. She's got family, but that deep down of like, man, the world has plenty enough kids that don't have fathers around.
Yep.
Like, I need to stick around. I need to be a dad that's there. I mean, because you got 4 kids.
Yes, sir.
So when you and Lana you got married and you said you gave your life to God when you and Lana, was it after y'all were married? Had y'all been married a while, or did you give your life to God and then you guys got married?
No, we got married at 17 years old.
Oh, wow.
She got pregnant, we got married.
Okay.
I was living with my mom, and my mom like, you're about to have a kid, you get married.
Yeah.
And so, my mom really was the rock of our family, right? So dad's a recluse, and my dad couldn't keep a job. He was a great worker. He couldn't pass a drug test, and so even if he got the job, could stay clean for a few months, and eventually it would fall apart because he couldn't pass the drug test and he'd lose the job. But I remember growing up, I don't remember a time where my mom didn't have 3 jobs. Like I truly, she'd always have a side hustle. She would always be doing something. She'd be, it was a place called Hamilton Enterprises. So when you think about a Tupperware salesman, it was kind of like that thing. She would sell from Hamilton's outside of the house, and but to shorten the story, my mama she was the good influence on our life. Like, she was the one trying to hold it all together. She was the one trying to be impactful. She was the one, when my dad's running to the ballroom, she's running the church, right? When my dad's, screaming about whatever, she's the one saying, no, we're going to pray about this. And so, like, we had, as much as I had, it's almost like the cartoons where you have the devil on one side and the angel on the other. As much as you had this 50% over here showing you everything to do wrong, we did have 50% over here, probably dropping the mic, but I have 50% over here still trying going, hey man, that's sin. You shouldn't be doing that, right? And so we did have good influence in our life, and so that was one of the quick examples of, you're not like, you having sex, you got a baby coming, like, we're going to the justice of the peace. Let's get this done. You're getting married. And I was, honestly, I was perfectly fine with that. I think exactly what you say, and the idea, I may not have known how to do it right, but I always thought I would be a good father, and I always thought I would be a good husband. I always had this desire to have a family. Just wasn't good at it, just to be blunt about it. And I'm going to go back to, because I'm going to ask you a question about this. I'm going to ask you to share as well, because I felt like, even though I desired to do things well, I just didn't know enough about it to do it. So even if I took one step forward, it was like 2 steps back. And you think you're doing well, but can't control the finances, so we falling apart over here. And because you can't control your finances, now we're stealing electricity, and then you're falling back forward. So as a man trying to be the one that's supporting the family, like, you're failing and you're failing and failing, and then you have all these other influences, and let's just be honest for a second. We're 17, 18, 19 years old. You still have life. You're still trying to be a kid in many ways with the kid at home. And me or Lana, neither one of us were heavy drinkers, but we'd still, friends would come over on a weekend, we'd be drinking, different stuff like that. And so you kind of have a kid over here in the background, but you're having a party over here in the living room. And those two things eventually start battling with each other. And so the short of my long story is that when I got saved at 24, it was because my first marriage was falling apart. Me and Lana were separated, and I know, I have nothing. I'm about to lose everything, and my wife has already walked away from me, all for my fault, right? Things that I had done wrong. And so now I'm begging God to be the glue that pieces it back together. What I learned quickly, I got saved in a discipleship church, and so the ground root of what we did, we call them life groups. They had cell groups, but everything about our life groups was discipleship. So it was about raising leaders up, and so from the get-go, we had men and women separate. When I think the first meeting I ever went to, men and women was together. By the second meeting, the church had decided to split it, and their rules behind it was that you would spend 55 minutes with the collective group, men and women together. Me and my wife would be sitting next to each other, and everything would be perfect. And the last 5 minutes, you would split up to pray. And the moment they would say, "Is there something I can pray for you for?" the first thing you would go is, "I'm about to leave this woman. I can't stand her." And so the church realized that we're really only doing church for 5 minutes, and then we kind of playing the fake role for 55. So we wasted 55 to try to get to God in the last 5. And so they started realizing, especially in what we were talking about earlier, let's just talk about New Orleans and how the freedom of sexual activity and different stuff, influences that you had. We realized that, man, we need men to be men, women to be women. We need you to walk in and be able to say, "I'm struggling with my addiction to porn." I'm not saying that in front of my wife, right? Mm-hmm. And so, hey, the secretary at work, she's been whispering in my ear, and I'm really thinking about diving into this relationship, and I'm not sure if this marriage is going to work. It's so you started realizing that we could be real man to man, we could be real woman to woman, but if and it may not even be as easy as just my spouse being next to me. Maybe I'm perfect. Maybe my wife knows my problems. Hey, I can't stop drinking. I can't stop it. But I may not want to say that in front of you or your wife, especially when you talked about sexual addiction. And so we had so much of that in New Orleans that we knew we had to kind of split things up. With that said, by the time I get saved and start going to World Prayer Tabernacle, my church, I'm in with a group of men. And so immediately at 24 years old, I got some guys. In fact, it was twins. It was Mike and Manuel Guerra was their last name. And Mike was my life group leader. And I don't know all the ins and outs of the background, never asked him, but he had some kids that he had lost in not being a great dad, And so I needed a dad, and he was happy to have a spiritual son, and I was happy to have a spiritual father. And so those men really dove into my life. And so anytime I needed something, kind of like you and I all, where we can just call and go, "Man, I'm struggling with this." And as a young convert and trying to figure out marriage, and I needed that. I needed someone to go, "Well, of course it's failing, man. This is you need to be doing this if you want to be a good husband. You need to be following these rules if you want to be a good daddy." And so my life changed getting saved. I don't want to take anything away from God, but it moved in another direction because God put men in my life that was able to invest back inside of me. And so with that, I'm really, because I know you always talk about your grandpa, but once again, we both come from similar backgrounds. I had a dad around. I know your dad was somewhat absent, but you're a great dad. I'm telling you, I look up to you, my friend. Me and Chrissy look up to you and Jennifer as a marriage, and then I look up to you as a father to those 6 kids you have. And outside of God, because when I'm kind of debating in my mind, I go, well, yeah, man, I know Dylan's doing well because he's got God, but I also know that there's minute details in there, and so like I know this is not the way it's supposed to go, but I'm going to ask kind of you the same question. Like, how did you flip it, and how did you become a good father in the absence of not having a dad?
Yeah. Yeah, actually, when you're thinking that, because I was thinking, man, how did I? Because I pulled stuff off of, I mean, there was specific things that stood out to me, and at first it was real weird. I was like, is that what a dad looks like? Like, they seriously, but the Bible says, to where it says, seek and you shall find, knock and the door shall be open, ask and you shall receive. I was asking, like, especially the first couple of years, me and Jennifer, like, I wanted out. I was trying to figure out ways to get out. I wasn't even sleeping in the same bed with her. I wasn't attracted to her. I was miserable. And I was like, I'm going to be miserable my whole life, and I was like, something has to change. And I was begging God. Like, take me out. Like, if I'm going to be miserable, just take me out. Give her a different man that can do better. But I started begging God, and it's real sloppy and God's okay with that. I prayed some crazy stuff, ideas, trying to give God ideas of how he could fix it, and God started, just highlights. I remember, our pastor, Steve, his son, Jonathan, I just vividly remember I was coming down the hallway of the church, and Jonathan, he was bawling, upset about something, and he got to his dad and I mean, just, crying. I don't know what he was crying over, but he just buried his head in Steve's, chest, and Steve just started rubbing the back of his head, just consoling him, and like affection, touching him,
Yeah.
and I was like, I was uncomfortable with it. Mm-hmm. I'd never really seen that. I mean, my grandpa was a great man, but he wasn't like hugging me and, like, it just, and my mom was not real affectionate whatsoever, when you get hurt, she'd be like, you suck it up. Like, you just gonna have to figure it out, but I remember being like, man, that is weird. I was like, is that what we're, as dads, we're supposed to do? Like, because you're always like, I always thought, you don't show them affection because then it can soften them up, and they've got to be tough. And but I remember that standing out to me, and me just like dwelling on that, like, why is that so uncomfortable for me? And another man, and it's so funny, he doesn't admit it, but he just one time told me I wasn't good enough for his daughter because his daughter was serving the Lord, and I was a punk kid, and that really stood out to me, and I just these different deals, and I just started seeing these men differently, these men that I thought just were a threat, especially when you're trying to sleep with the next girl and you're trying to tell them what all that, and these men are like, this ain't happening with my girl, or they're loving their kids and stuff. And I think that when you truly seek God, he just shows you. He puts those little highlights and those people in your life. Because my grandfather was a great man. He was very loyal. He worked hard, but he wasn't, real affectionate. And, he was more like, he was just tough. If he was hurting, if he said he didn't feel good, like he was probably about to die, I mean, he's just that kind of man, but I think that the Bible says that God always gives us a way out. If we want a way out of our sin, if we want a way out of our ignorance or the things that we lack as a man or as a father, God is there to give us a way out, but we have to stick around, keep seeking, keep asking, keep knocking. Otherwise, the door's never going to be open. If we just desire it but don't seek it or bang on the door, I mean, I felt like in my marriage trying to keep it apart, I was like trying to kick the door. I was like, how do I get this stinking door open? Because I cannot figure this out, So
you talk about kissing people, and so our culture is that we kiss people, and so but generally speaking, men didn't kiss men, but you always greeted people with a kiss back home, and it was always kiss on the cheek. But you understand what I'm saying? Like, you would always kiss people, and so when I started going to World Prayer Tabernacle, and the men would kiss men on the cheek, but the pastor from the pulpit would preach, and I wish I knew the actual verse, and I don't remember if I know it's New Testament. I don't remember if it was the words of Christ or if it was just in Paul's writing, but it says to greet each one with a holy kiss,
yeah.
right? And so it was like my dad was, once again, he was there. I don't necessarily, like my dad was a champion for me. Like I remember the high fives, and he always would tell us how great we were going to be, and he would try to instill words. I don't never necessarily remember sitting in his lap and him cuddling me, like the same thing like you said. I don't remember any of that. But I will tell you that I was very open to the idea of these men loving on me, if that made sense. Like to be accepted and to be part of their group meant something so special to me. And there's a few guys around that I'll still kiss on the cheek from time to time. Like it's just such a level of respect that I have for people. And but it is weird how especially for men, where I think you're trying to find that line. Jordan Peterson, I've done a little bit of his reading. I watched some of his podcast, and you may have heard this one before, but he always talks about, for men, you should be a monster. You should flat out be a monster. He said, but then you should learn how to control it, because there's nothing virtuous about being a rabbit. A rabbit's not virtuous because he's kind. A rabbit is virtuous. A rabbit has to escape because that's survival for him. He doesn't have the ability to attack. He doesn't have the ability to defend. He has to just run. But the monster, right, the lion, he decides when to attack and when not. And so the concept behind what Jordan Peterson always says is that men should grow up learning how to be a monster. They should just know how to tool it back and understand when they have to use it. So that way you and your wife's walking down a dark alley and someone tries to hurt your wife, you can step up and be the monster. But every other time, you're gentle as a dove, right? And that's where being virtuous makes sense, because you're not virtuous because you're weak. You're virtuous because you're strong and you know how to use it. And so like it's such a unique gift when you can be a Dylan Phillips and you can protect your wife and your kids and you can stand up to anyone that you want, but you can also walk up to an altar, put your arms around another man and weep and pray for him while he's crying out to God for help, right? Those are the two facets in the idea of what God's trying to build in a man. Strength on one side, but compassion, grace, mercy, and being virtuous on the other side, that we can weep together, but, oh, yeah, it's time to fight, no problem, I'll stand up and fight. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's something to say about that, because, like I think about David. David was an absolute monster, or a warrior. Yes. And he fought to risking his life for his men, and I think it's because he also had, the Bible says he had a heart after God. He knew how to show compassion and to love, and when you truly love people and you let God soften your heart, because a cold-hearted man, he might be mean and strong, but he has no problem leaving you. Yes. Because his heart's cold, and it's like I'll fight for me, but I ain't fighting for you. Yep. And when God softens our heart, I think that makes us better men, because we soften our heart to our children and to our wife, and we learn even a deeper love. So we have no problem laying our life down. Yes. We have no problem saying, hey, if something happens, you guys just take off running. Get in the car, leave me here. I'm good. I'd much rather you guys be safe, and I'll deal with the threat. And but without that true love, you might run yourself. Yep. Because your heart's kind of cold, and I think it's important for us men to soften our hearts and to love our children. It's still. I'll be lying if I said I was perfect at it. I still sometimes have to talk myself into giving my boys hugs and to loving on them. But my youngest boy, Bringston, he's not going to accept that. Like, he wants to give me a kiss. He wants to hug me, and he doesn't want just a pat on the back. Like, I'll do the the man thing. All right, buddy, and he will like latch on, and he's gonna make sure I give him a real long hug, and just love on him. And I mean, he's teaching me.
Yes, sir.
He's teaching me to, like, Dad, you got to show. He needs that love. He wants to know that his dad truly loves him, and I thank God, man. I thank God that He's knocked that ignorance out of me of that men can't be compassionate, or can't be loving, because it makes us stronger. Like, I have I have no problem laying my life down for my family. I mean, it just, I guess if I'm tested with it, we'll truly find out. But I feel like it would be no problem. I seen an interview, and these guys were interviewing men and women, and they were asking the women, if it was, your life was threatened and you were there with your husband, would you stay there to try to help fight your husband, or would you leave? They'd be like, I'd leave, and then people were going, oh, I can't believe that. What about all this equality and stuff? But then they went to the men, and they're like, if you and your wife were threatened with your lives, would you expect your wife to stand up? I was like, no, I want her to get out of there. Yes. I'll deal with the problem. And it was easy for the men to say, no, I'm going to protect my family. And so I think it's a good thing. God's put it in us. And it's easy to follow someone that would lay their life down for you.
100%.
It's like Jesus Christ. The reason He's easy to follow is because He did just that. He laid His life down.
I got a funny story about laying your life down. And so, you obviously my wife very well as far as her quiet nature. And so, but I was a student resource officer inside of the Prairie Grove School District for 8.5 years. And so our primary goal inside that school, although there's other details as far as our day-to-day operations, it was, if the bells go off, you better be running down that hallway. Like, that's it. That's what they employ you for. If gunshots are coming down, you better get in between them bullets and them kids. And so I knew the job. I understood it. It was something that was planted inside my heart, my mind, my spirit. I knew every day going to work, I would tell God that I was perfectly fine dying that day. And that was part of what I had to teach in myself, to make sure that I was ready. Well, guns never been pointed at me, never had bullets. Thank God that none of the Northwest Arkansas areas ever had to necessarily worry about that, at least in my time of being around. But we would have accidental pushes, or we would have stuff that we would think, and the alarms would go off, and we'd be screaming at kids, get in, get it. I don't want to scream in the mics, but in the rooms, locked doors, we're running down the hallways, we pulling guns, we're going at it, because you don't know. So what I can tell you is that in the times we thought it was real, like, we were always moving. So in my mind, like, I know the task, we'll never move. Well, you go back down to, I can't remember if it was Florida or Virginia Tech. It might have been Virginia Tech, where the officer didn't run inside that building, and he was civilly liable and some different stuff, legal terminology. But my quiet wife said, you better run down that hallway if them alarms go off. And like, I mean intense when she says those words. You do not come back home if you don't run down that hallways. And my wife's a teacher, and so she knows what it is to be on the opposite side of that, being a teacher, hoping that you coming down and protecting, watching those kids in there, hoping that you coming down to protect. And so my quiet wife, who you would never think would like give an order, look you deep in the face and say, you better. And so I'm like, baby, you don't have to worry about that. Like, and I would always joke with the school district of, if that ever happened and I give my life, just build me a statue. That's all I want. Nothing big, just a statue out front. And but it's an intense thing. But I also think that what you're saying is true. That's part of the reason why I think the kids of Prairie Grove always knew that, hey man, when something was going on, folks, there, like we never hesitated. And same thing with my wife. I think my wife never thinks twice about whether or not she's protected or not. Now, on deep down inside of me, am I going to make it? Am I going to live through it? Can I take everyone out? No, but you, like you said, you just get out of here.
Yeah.
Like, don't worry about me. Like we'll deal with that. That's me, that other person, and God. But you got to hightail it. You got to get to safety.
There's more. There's a whole nother story to get to, and we might have to do a part 2.
Okay.
Going back to your first marriage, it not working out, and just that whole trend, because there's a lot to where you are now. There's a whole life that's been lived there, struggle, pain, and all that. And I think that we've got the groundwork of all these things that have happened, God coming into your life and just kind of set the base ground. But I think there's another story to be told of the doors God has opened, the doors God has shut,
Yes, sir.
and the path of, sometimes it didn't even look like there was a path, and God just continued to. So thanks for listening to part 1. On our part 2, we're going to be talking about David's beginning of his new life, having to start completely over, and just what that looks like. We appreciate you watching. And remember, the easiest way to become an idiot is to hang out with idiots, and you'll quickly become one. See you in the next one.